Han Li had no intention of chasing after the silver-winged night fiend in this new place. Without the barrier trapping the night fiend, he wouldn't be able to easily slay it with the Triflame fan. Also, he turned to look at the weeping soul beast, who was now waving a white object in its hand, and smiled. Upon closer inspection, it was a small, delicate horse with 2 green eyes and was half a foot tall. It was the Umbra Yin horse, the objective of their dangerous journey. Just as the teleportation began, it concealed itself once more on the corpse wolf's body. As a result, it was captured when the weeping soul beast had used its yellow mist to extract the corpse wolf's chi. If Han Li hadn't noticed and commanded the weeping soul beast to stop, the Umbra Yin horse might have been devoured. As for the 2 flying swords that the Night Fiend had captured, it paid them no mind after the teleportation, and Han Li was able to easily take them back. Unfortunately for the black-robed woman's nascent soul, the Night Fiend had swallowed it before escaping. The sole thing that left him gloomy was that his crystal flying needle had been captured by the silver-winged Night Fiend. Fortunately, the Night Fiend shouldn't be able to erase his spiritual marks in a short time. There could be an opportunity to seize it back. Having settled these thoughts, Han Li looked around him. It closely resembled the underground cavern they were in, but no yin winds were present, and the air was filled with an abundant spiritual qi. It appeared this cave was located above a top-quality spirit vein. He then looked at the spell formation he was stepping on. From his knowledge and experience, he was able to tell that it was clearly a receiving spell formation. In other words, there was no way to return using the formation. Han Li frowned in thought for a moment before turning his attention to the huge cocoons. They contained strong pulses of spiritual qi, clearly indicating that Old Man Fu and Bai Ye were still alive. Han Li hesitated for a moment before waving at the weeping soul beast and summoning the Umbra Yin horse into his hand. Then, he placed it in a spirit beast pouch after sticking several restrictive talismans on it. With that done, Han Li raised his hand and released 2 dense bolts of golden lightning at the gray cocoons. Explosions sounded out as the lightning wrapped around the cocoons in a huge net. This battle between the lightning and the threads lasted for a time. Without the control of the silver-winged Night Fiend, the Ghost Fiend threads began to disperse layer after layer within the lightning. Eventually, the cocoons burst to reveal Old Man Fu and Bai Ye. The 2 had pale complexions and unsightly expressions. After spending so much time trapped by the Ghost Fiend threads, they were certain to have gone through excruciating pain, considering their magic power had been forcefully absorbed by the threads. Old Man Fu relaxed and saluted him. "Many thanks for your rescue, Brother Han." Bai Ye gave a bow and wryly smiled. "If it weren't for Brother Han's great abilities, I fear we would have all perished. Who could have known the Yin-Yang Cave was home to a silver-winged Night Fiend? We weren't able to defend ourselves when that monster ambushed us. In the struggle, fellow Taoist Yuan lost his nascent soul and perished." Han Li faintly smiled when he heard their thanks. Although the 2 appeared grateful, Han Li noticed a trace of fear deep within their eyes. After all, the 2 were able to clearly sense the battle as they were trapped. Han Li not only had the power to contend against the silver-winged Night Fiend, but was even able to force him to flee. The 2 absolutely wouldn't stand a chance against him, and given the fact that they were teleported to some mysterious place where no one else was around, they couldn't help but feel greatly uneasy. If Han Li possessed malicious intentions, things wouldn't end well for them. Without any regard to this, Han Li tossed a spirit beast pouch to Old Man Fu. "The Umbra Yin horse is in there. If you manage to produce extra pills, give me 2 of them. Is this acceptable?" Old Man Fu's heart relaxed and he said, "Of course, if I produce enough, they are yours." Bai Ye smiled. "I also have no objections. I'm quite ashamed to have entirely relied on your power. It is only natural for you to receive a higher share." Han Li then looked in the direction of the cave's exit and narrowed his eyes. "Good. Fellow Taoists, you should rest here. I'll scout ahead and see how it looks outside." "Brother Han, please go ahead. We could use the rest." Old Man Fu raised no objections. Bai Ye nodded and sat down cross-legged. Han Li smiled, and azure light glowed from his body before he streaked forward. At the same time, he fully released his spiritual sense in case the silver-winged Night Fiend was hiding anywhere nearby or if the 2 cultivators planned on sneaking away. His tracking markers on the 2 still had a few days before they expired. As Han Li was no saint, the thought of killing them for their treasures briefly appeared in his mind. However, he knew too little about the nascent nurturing pill. Even if he were able to acquire the formula for it, his odds of creating it weren't very high. The two had also given him a favorable impression, so he had no desire to kill them. As such, he had taken the initiative to release them after a moment of thought. When he left the main chamber, he found a flight of stairs that went up. He wasn't able to see where it ended. Strange, could it be they were deep underground? Feeling somewhat surprised, he flew directly up. Not long after, Han Li grew astonished. He had flown up the stairs for a while, but it still kept going. Although he had only flown for a short time, his speed was quite impressive. If it weren't for the fact that his spiritual sense was able to clearly see his surroundings, he would have suspected he had fallen into a restriction of some sort. How could a passage possibly be so long? Han Li had flown several kilometers before finally seeing the light at the end. When he flew out from the passage, his environment lit up and he found himself in a large paved area. The entire floor, which spanned over 3 kilometers, was made of stone bricks, and he could smell the sweet fragrance of plants. The spiritual chi was even more dense than down below at the teleportation formation. However, this all paled in comparison to what he saw when he swept his gaze forward. At the end of the paved area, there was a tall cliff face, and when he looked up, he only saw a mountain without end. There was also a tall mountain wall behind him. It appears that he was lying at their valley. Han Li looked to the sky for a long while, only to find a few winding cliffs. Then, without another thought, and he took to the skies. After flying several kilometers, Han Li eventually flew out from the valley, revealing a sight he couldn't believe. Soon, he hastily shot forward and circled his surroundings before returning to his original place. The only word that came to Han Li's mind was big. Han Li had seen countless mountains over his lifetime, the largest of them being the Heavenly Star Island's sacred mountain. The huge mountain before him appeared to be a pillar reaching for the heavens, and what he saw alone could even be divided into 81 stories to house a vast number of cultivators to his lowest estimate. He was currently at the base of the huge mountain, and couldn't make an accurate comparison in size to the Heavenly Star Island's sacred mountain, though he could take a guess at which was larger. When he raised his head, he saw a deep turquoise sky without end. The valley he emerged from was nothing but an insignificant crack in the mountains. But what especially troubled Han Li and rendered him speechless was that the mountain had a huge restriction placed on top of it. When he looked to the outskirts, he saw a white light barrier appearing to cover the mountain in its entirety. Such a massive sight left Han Li in awe. This was definitely the doing of ancient cultivators. With some hesitation, he hastily flew over and arrived in front of it by the time it took to finish a cup of tea. He was nothing but a mere speck in comparison to the massive barrier. He examined it for a long while but flew back, unable to see precisely how thick it was. There is no point in testing its power, he thought. Let alone a mid-nascent soul cultivator, even a deity transformation cultivator wouldn't be able to destroy it with brute force. When Han Li looked back at the mountain, he couldn't help but notice the distinct lack of any sound. He couldn't even hear the birds chirping, as if the mountains had no life at all. This was quite odd, with the fiercely abundant spiritual chi surrounding the mountain, giving Han Li a bizarre feeling. With a gloomy expression on his face, he returned to the valley and arrived back at the teleportation formation. When he returned to the cave, he found Old Man Fu and Bai Yai meditating. Han Li had no intention of bothering them. Rather, he paused momentarily before slapping his storage pouch, taking out a pile of formation flags and plates and tossing them into the air. Multicolored light enveloped the entire cavern. It was a simple spell formation that had the effects of concealment and detection, allowing an early warning if anybody were to trespass. The other two turned a blind eye to Han Li's actions and remained still in place. Han Li smiled when he saw this and sat down cross-legged at a corner of the cave before joining them in meditation. Over the span of a day, Old Man Fu and Bai Yai gradually restored their magic power and arose shortly after. When the two stood up, Han Li's face stirred and he opened his eyes, asking, "Fellow Taoists, have you recovered your strength?" Bai Yai sweetly smiled and replied, "Many thanks for your protection, Brother Han. We have just about restored our magic power." Old Man Fu looked at the center of the huge teleportation formation and asked, "Has Brother Han already gone outside to see where we are?" Han Li calmly answered, "Yes, but I'm not sure. We are in the depths of a giant mountain and are surrounded by a gargantuan restriction." Old Man Fu's eyes lit up and he confidently said, "Since Brother Han is an overseas cultivator, he wouldn't be too familiar with the famous features of the mainland. I might be able to recognize where we are." Han Li chuckled and casually replied, "Oh, is that so? In that case, please ahead and take a look." When Bai Yai heard this, her eyes lit up. From Brother Han's tone, there seems to be something peculiar about the mountain. Shall I take a look too? Han Li nodded indifferently. As he possessed abilities far greater than the other two, it was only natural that he became their leader. As a result, they exchanged a glance before flying out from the cave in streaks. Han Li remained sitting down, but flipped his hand to summon the tracking formation plate. When he looked at it, he could clearly see a white and a black dot. He narrowed his eyes and continued to watch in silence. Not long after, he raised his brow and put it away in a flash of light. Following that, light glowed from the stairs, and the two cultivators made a return. However, the two now wore an unsightly expression. "Well, did you discover anything?" Han Li asked with a mysterious smile. Although he wasn't familiar with the Great Jinn, he would know if there was a spiritual mountain as large as what he had seen. Old Man Fu wryly smiled. "Brother Han, now is not the time for jokes. I've never even heard of a mountain that large. We are no longer certain that we're in the Great Jinn." With that said, his face revealed a trace of worry. Bai Yai tightly frowned. "That's right, if this huge mountain was located in the Great Jinn, we definitely would have heard of it before." "Perhaps," Han Li calmly said, "although I don't know much about the outside restriction or the circumstances surrounding the mountain, I am certain that this teleportation formation was something that was placed down by ancient cultivators. The formation could have been activated from the battle or even something else entirely. But that isn't important. For now, let's first refine the nascent cultivating pill and then proceed from there." Old Man Fu smiled after a moment of silence and said, "Brother Han's words are reasonable. The spiritual qi here is abundant, and there is no harm in staying a bit longer. Furthermore, we don't have anything to fear with Brother Han here. Maybe this is an opportunity." Bai Yai was also looking forward to the nascent cultivator pill and nodded. "Brother Fu, your praise is too much." Han Li then changed his tone and said, "I'm not sure if you too have noticed, but the outside restrictions have greatly suppressed our spiritual sense, only allowing us to see a couple of kilometers out. I'm not sure how long it would take for us to search through this giant area." Bai Yai replied, "It is also quite strange how there is no life on this mountain. This doesn't seem to be a place where we can rest easy." Old Man Fu dryly chuckled and said, "Regardless, the spiritual qi here is abundant and will be greatly beneficial to refine the pills here. I'll go ahead and get started." The other two raised no objections, and they all placed down a spirit-gathering formation and several more protective restrictions before Old Man Fu began the refinement process. For the time being, Han Li and Bai Yai had remained in the cave and were standing on watch. After all, the nascent cultivating pill was an item greatly important to them, and they had to be prepared for anything strange happening in the mountain. Halfway up an enormous mountain, the group of Yi clan cultivators were gathered at a stone pavilion. Most of them were sitting, cross-legged with their hands holding spirit stones. The Yi clan Grand Elder, the white-robed scholar, floated above and was looking at the stairs in front of him with indifference. They were constructed of pure white jade. At a distance, it looked as if it were the stairway to heaven. However, the white steps were nearly 20 meters wide, and as he looked up, he only saw the stairs ascend into a white mist with no end in sight. Soon, a light flashed from the horizon and streaked over before flying in the direction of the stairs. The scholar stirred, and he turned to face the approaching light. It arrived before him in the blink of an eye and disappeared to reveal the eccentric with a large head, the Yi clan's seventh uncle. The eccentric solemnly said, "Young third, I've already followed the stairs several tens of kilometers and found a decorated archway. It appears to be the myriad cultivator gate from legend, but unless the restrictions sealing it are removed, there is no way to proceed." The scholar let out a sigh and said, "If that's true, then over 10,000 ancient cultivators must have lived on Kunwu Mountain in the past. We'll only be able to access their residences after we enter." The eccentric looked down to the cultivators resting in the pavilion and frowned. "However, the sealing restrictions are quite unordinary. We should work on dispelling it as soon as we can. We don't have the time to waste." The scholar helplessly said, "Of course, but the magic power of our elders are lacking as of current, and they will need time to rest. We can't split from them. Though we might be fine, this place can't be safe." The eccentric could only respond with a sigh. "That is so. I didn't expect that passing through the opening in the seal to Kunwu Mountain would prove so difficult. It is fortunate that we are all at nascent soul stage or someone would have surely died." The scholar smiled and was about to say something else when his expression sank, and he turned around. "What is it?" the eccentric asked with a puzzled tone. "There seems to be a sound coming in that direction," the scholar solemnly replied. A sound. The eccentric circulated the magic power throughout his body and could faintly hear the snarls of a beast. It was feline-like and grew stronger as it went on. "What? Something is coming." A glacial light flashed from the eccentric's eyes, and he flipped his hand to summon an item flickering with silver light. The scholar looked into the distance with complete focus. Soon, a purple cloud appeared and was flying in their direction. In the blink of an eye, it arrived near them and stopped 300 meters away. The scholar and the eccentric could faintly see a black figure within the mist along with a pair of scarlet eyes. The eyes brimmed hostile fury. The eccentric's bearing sank and he raised his hand, releasing a silver streak from his hand. It disappeared from sight, but at that moment a pair of huge bird talons suddenly emerged from the purple mist. Following a bang, silver light flashed. A loud beastly snarl sounded out, and the huge talons were rigidly grasping onto the object, an exquisite silver blade. It was several inches long and brilliant. However, the talons did drip with green blood, and the monster was howling with pain. With an ominous glint shining from its eyes, the purple mist suddenly faded away, leaving only two vicious demon eyes left in sight. But even they disappeared after a few blinks. Both the cultivator's air then quickly shifted. The monster was proficient in concealment techniques. Given how their spiritual senses were limited on the mountain, it would be greatly troublesome to fight it. The two exchanged a glance before casting their techniques. The eccentric spat out a yellow flying sword and circled once into the air before expanding to 3 meters long. Afterwards, swordlight flourished from it as it danced in the air and released several streaks of dazzling sword chi, surrounding a perimeter of 30 meters. With a cold snort, the scholar shook his sleeve and summoned a small green flag into his hand. He tossed it to the ground, and a green chi rushed out from it, creating a fog that protected the Yi clan cultivators that were resting nearby. With two puffs, light flashed again 100 meters away from the stone pavilion, and a purple mist made an appearance. A furious howl came from within. With two more angry roars, the mist scattered to reveal a four-winged bird with a lion's head. It had a wingspan of 20 meters, and purple light coiled around its body in a fearsome display. A lion hawk, the eccentric shouted out in alarm upon seeing the beast's true appearance. The scholar's expression changed, and he shook his sleeve to release a red-black saber, fiercely chopping towards the beast. In an odd display, the feral beast revealed fear upon seeing the saber, and gaped open its mouth to spit out rings of purple light towards it. A series of explosions erupted, and black-purple light shined as the flying saber cut through the dozen rings of light with unrelenting force, but with each destroyed ring, its light weakened. By the time the saber actually reached the beast, its light had greatly dimmed and was forcibly blocked by the few remaining rings. The beast rejoiced at the sight of this, and thought to employ more of its abilities to capture the saber. But then the scholar spat out a mist of blood essence and grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and pointed at it. The blood essence instantly condensed crimson talisman characters before fading away from sight. Simultaneously, the flying saber erupted in a similar light and destroyed all of the remaining rings, arriving in front of the demon beast just as it was about to cleave through it. Alarmed, the beast quickly flapped its wings and shot backward, raising one of its claws to block the blow. Green blood splattered through the air. The flying saber was blocked for a time, but it also began to cleave halfway through. The demon beast suddenly raised its massive head and let out a world-shaking roar. This left them both dazed as if it shook the very heavens themselves. An unimaginable scene followed. Translucent golden ripples left the lion's mouth and flowed towards the saber, sending it cascading through the air as if struck by an immense force. The eccentric tried to assist the saber with his own yellow swordlights to little success. However, the further the ripples spread, the quicker they faded away. After releasing those golden ripples, the demon beast seemed to tire. It fiercely glared at the scholar and flapped its wings with a thunderous boom. Then its figure blurred before disappearing in a giant burst of lightning. In the following moment, it reappeared 100 meters away. However, it didn't dare to stop there, and flew off into the distance in a streak of purple, quickly leaving line of sight. When the eccentric saw this, he sighed and turned to look at the scholar who now had a pale complexion. He worryingly asked, "Young third, are you all right? It already consumes a large amount of magic power to control the black blood saber, but you even used blood essence to forcefully increase its might. The scholar sighed and shook his head. I'm fine, I only lost a bit of vitality. That lion hawk was a famous bird of prey during ancient times. Its abilities should be even stronger than late nascent soul cultivators like us. If we hadn't driven it away, it would have turned incredibly dangerous. Now that we've injured it, it shouldn't come to easily bother us again. The eccentric appeared relieved to hear this. As an ancient bird of prey, its body should be incredibly hardy. If you hadn't used our clan's black blood saber, we hardly would have injured it. The scholar smiled and then turned his eyes to the green mist down below. The Yi clan cultivators had been startled by the monster's arrival, but they managed to calm down. He nodded at the sight of this and spoke a bit with the eccentric before heading down to the stone pavilion to rest. Underneath a huge mountain near Myriad Poison Valley, there were 5 white silhouettes standing in a row. They were facing 2 black-robed cultivators who were respectfully giving them a report. There is a phenomenon in the sky. A mysterious voice sounded out intermittently from around them in an entrancing fashion. One of the black-robed cultivators answered, "Yes, Grand Elder. There are 7 pillars of light directly shooting into the sky near a nameless lake in the Payan Prefecture." "When did this happen? Did you discover what it is?" The master of the voice sounded interested. "It happened 4 days ago," one of the cultivators respectfully replied. "One of our disciples acquired the information and immediately made a report. It is said that the pillars of light are above an incredibly large seal. Due to its size, we are unable to properly locate its position. Many of the sects in Nanjiang were alarmed by this sudden occurrence and have sent over nascent soul-grade cultivators to investigate." 7 pillars of light. I heard that leakage of spiritual light can be produced from a broken restriction. How interesting, I'll have to go personally. In any case, you said that the 9 Serenities Sect's Elder Fu was discovered near here, but now there is no news of him. Were you mistaken? If you can't even find this person, then how are you supposed to find that fellow named Han? Near the end, this mysterious voice turned cold. The 2 black-robed cultivators were flustered by his words, and one of them hastily explained, "Please don't be angry, Grand Elder. We truly acquired information that Elder Wei was sighted heading in this direction, but he disappeared when he approached Myriad Poison Valley. There truly are traces of cultivator movements, but I've swept through all areas of the valley apart from the Yin-Yang Cave. I'm sure there is no one in the valley, and don't tell me that he went into the Yin-Yang Cave. If he did enter, I would have known by now, unless that old man planned on spending the rest of his life down there." After the mysterious voice said this, the black-robed cultivators muttered and found themselves at a loss of what to say, and cold sweat dripped from their faces. The mysterious voice then said, "I'll leave it be. It wasn't easy for you to search for this place to begin with. I'll give you some more time. Send people to survey the valley and I'll go and take a trip to the Payan Prefecture. Inform Elders Wu and Zio that they will be accompanying me. It will be better with more people." "Yes, Grand Elder." The 2 black-robed cultivators felt a wave of relief and bowed. Then the 5 white silhouettes took to the skies, merging in position as one before tearing through the air. There were a group of cultivators that crossed the border into the Payan Prefecture, approaching the small lake. There were over 20 of them, each wearing blue robes and red headscarves. The 4 at the very front possessed nascent soul cultivation. In particular, the middle-aged cultivator with jade lines on his face was at the peak of mid-nascent soul stage. His body possessed an icy-cold aura, giving others a feeling of great danger. An old man at early nascent soul stage worriedly asked, "Senior Marshal Brother Hua, are we truly going to muster a large number of forces? We've brought a majority of our disciples with us. If there are any mishaps, our strength will greatly suffer." The middle-aged cultivator replied, "If a grand treasure is descending into this world, there won't be much trouble, but it is very likely this is the legendary Kunwu Mountain. We must take the risk to acquire the mountain's secret treasures." Kunwu Mountain, the spiritual mountain that our sect founder had always searched for. A different gray-haired old man gasped with alarm. Light flashed from the green marks on the middle-aged cultivator's face. "That's right. I've said it once before when you all ascended to nascent soul stage. During times of antiquity, it was one of the legendary spiritual mountains of the mortal realm, but for some unknown reason, the ancient cultivators used their great abilities to seal it away. However, the mountain's secret treasures are sure to be many. Our sect's founder was, in fact, a descendant of an ancient cultivator that helped seal the mountain. He was certain it was sealed somewhere in Nanjiang, but knew little else. I reckon he established this sect in Nanjiang to search for the mountain's whereabouts, but his efforts were in vain. This was a secret that had been passed down throughout the successive generations of sect elders. The third old man, one with thick eyebrows, puzzlingly asked, "Why is senior martial brother Hua certain that the pillars of light are an omen of Kunwu Mountain's appearance?" The middle-aged man chuckled. "Our founder left behind a spirit-detecting pearl that his ancestor once possessed. It was specifically made to detect the flying immortal stone on the mountain. Now that it has appeared, the pearl has reacted. Several days ago, it had begun to ring inside the founder's hall. Even without the pillars of light in the sky, I would have dispatched all of our disciples anyways." So it was like that. The three old nascent soul cultivators wore expressions of understanding and soon, excitement. The gray-haired old man sighed and said, "It is a pity that senior martial brother Yuan wasn't at the sect. With all of us, this matter would be much safer. Junior martial brother Yuan left on rather secretive business, and we neither know where he is, nor have any way to contact him. However, I've given orders to the disciples that remain to have him immediately join us upon his return. For now, we need to take advantage of this opportunity to enter the mountain first and seize a majority of its treasures. And we still don't know if the seal on the mountain had broke on its own, or if it was the doing of other cultivators. If it was the latter, we'll have to be particularly careful." With that said, the middle-aged cultivator's expression turned grave. The cultivators of the sacred poison sect couldn't have possibly known that their junior martial brother Yuan had perished at the hands of the silver-winged night fiend. After they chatted for a moment more, they made haste to quickly hurry on their way. The sooner they arrived, after all, the better. Above a small lake in the Payan province, there were already several hundreds of various cultivators gathered. Many of them were flying about in the sky, searching around the 7 pillars of light. There were a few cultivators skilled in earth movement techniques that occasionally burrowed into the ground, and excitedly spoke with a few of their companions standing on the surface. It was clear that these people had already discovered the huge seal underneath. As for the opening the Yi clan forcefully split open, they had yet to find it. But even so, all of the cultivators in the area were extremely excited and sent voice transmission talismans to each of their own clans and sects. There were even those that flew throughout the night to report the matter in person. Currently, a majority of the cultivators present were at foundation establishment stage with sparsely few chi condensation and core formation cultivators amongst them. Most of them were also vagrants that had unintentionally discovered the pillars of light and rushed over, but a few of them were scouts sent by various powers to investigate. There were currently no nascent soul cultivators. This was no surprise. The small lake originally belonged to a desolate area with nothing of note nearby. With no large clans or sect present, there was no reason for a nascent soul cultivator to be there. Even the sacred poison sect, who immediately rushed over at first news of this event, was still 2 days away. However, when it was discovered that there was a giant seal underground, the more experienced vagrant cultivators all made the decision to wisely depart despite their reluctance. While the seal may reap amazing profits, but the ensuing battle of high-grade cultivators that would ensue over them wasn't something they could participate in. If they continued to stay and the area became a battleground for high-grade cultivators, it would end in disaster. Of course, there were many younger, more spirited low-grade cultivators rather unwilling to depart. Not only did they want to see what laid beneath, they also had a small hope of being lucky. Their cultivation wasn't high, but if the opportunity arose, they could achieve grand rewards. It was a gamble they were willing to take. As such, all sorts of characters gathered there, carrying their own designs and thoughts. In the cave at the heart of a giant mountain, Han Li and Bai Yai were sitting cross-legged, staring at old man Fu with complete focus. Though in reality, they were staring at the sparkling golden cauldron in front of him. It was a meter tall and slowly revolved above the ground. Old man Fu spat out thin strands of green nascent flame and held his hands in an unknown gesture, occasionally striking at the cauldron with spell seals. With each strike, more of the green flames surrounding the cauldron turned into rainbow light, making for a gorgeous display. Medicinal scents were already bleeding from the cauldron. The aroma was rich and pleasant. His face grew solemn and his strikes turned fervent. It was clear that he was in a crucial moment of pill refinement. And Li observed with a calm expression, contrary to the nervousness in his heart. Old man Fu had successively tossed in the Umbra Yin horse and other rare materials into the cauldron over the past few days. This was their one shot. A second chance would be near impossible, as some ingredients simply couldn't be found again. Although Old Man Fu was confident in his refinement of the nascent cultivating pill, Han Li felt apprehensive and concerned as he watched. Bai Yei wasn't faring much better, as her eyes glistening with a burning fervor. Then the cauldron came to a sudden stop. Hums droned out from it, and the medicinal scent grew even denser. Old Man Fu's eyes lit up, and his past actions all came to a stop. He then flipped his hand to produce a vermilion gourd that was only 5 inches tall. With his other hand, he flicked his finger, sending a speck of white light to strike the lid of the cauldron. The lid trembled before sliding off. With the hums coming to a stop, 5 fist-sized balls of white light shot out with a thumb-sized green pill floating at their center. The pills themselves glowed a glistening emerald. These wisps circled once above the cauldron, before scattering towards different locations. Old Man Fu was already prepared, and hastily shook the gourd to release a mist from it. Then in a flash, the balls of light were sucked inside. The old man let out a long sigh and smiled. "All right, it's a success." Bai Yei shot up and happily said, "Thank you for your trouble, Brother Fu. I didn't expect that you'd be able to refine 5. Originally, I feared that the number of pills would fall short." Her face had a rosy complexion, adding much to her charm. "When I gathered together the materials, I had enough to refine about 5 or 6 pills. Why else would I invite 5 fellow Taoists to assist me? It is a pity that my junior martial sister and fellow Taoist Yuan hadn't survived." The old man's smile then disappeared. It was clear that he and the black-robed woman had a deep relationship. Although death was common sight amongst cultivators, the joy of success in creating the medicine pills wasn't able to overcome such a loss. When Bai Yei heard him, her smile disappeared as well and she let out a sigh. Unlike the others, Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but he did keep silent. Then the old man's sadness quickly faded and he said, "Fellow Taoist Bai, do you have a wood-attributed container? You shouldn't use any common ones for the pill or it will lose its medicinal potency. Also, the pill will require half a year of seclusion to properly consume, or its effects will be less than expected." "Of course I do, and naturally I wouldn't immediately take something this precious." Bai Yei sweetly smiled and with a flip of her hand, she summoned a yellow wooden case. The old man nodded and silently flicked the bottom of the gourd. Then red mist whirled out from it and released a ball of white light in Bai Yei's direction. She caught it with her free hand and quickly placed it within the box. After she closely examined the pill and clearly sensed its astonishing spiritual power, she put it away with unconcealed joy. Then, she repeatedly thanked him. Old Man Fu smiled, and he slapped the storage pouch at his waist to produce a green wooden box. He then exacted a pill from the gourd in a similar fashion and put it away. Then, after letting out a few dry laughs, he raised his hand and tossed the gourd in Han Li's direction. He caught the gourd unconsciously, but his face betrayed surprise. He frowned and slowly asked, "What is the meaning of this, fellow Taoist? I only asked for 2 nascent cultivating pills." With a stern face, the old man said, "I'm not an excessively greedy man. It is only by luck and your strength that I was able to both escape death and create these pills. Now that my junior martial sister has perished, I only have need for one. If Brother Han finds it acceptable, he may take the last 3. Han Li looked at the gourd in his hand and turned his eyes to the old man. He couldn't help but smile. He could vaguely guess what the old man intended. It seemed the 9 Serenities Sect elder believed that his value had greatly reduced now that the pills were finished, and that Han Li would suddenly turn hostile. As such, he had surrendered an additional pill. On one hand, he was clearly showing his goodwill, and on the other, he was giving Han Li less reason to kill him. So long as he wasn't a ruthless sort, he most likely wouldn't harbor any further malicious intent. Since Han Li was being presented with such a valuable gift, he could hardly refuse, and if he did, he would likely cause a misunderstanding. "In that case, I will graciously accept your offer." Without further hesitation, light flashed from his hand and the gourd disappeared. The old man chuckled and relaxed. "There is no need to be so modest, Brother Han. It is something well-deserved." Of course, Bai Yei came to understand what was happening, and she smiled in silence. With this, the tension eased in the group. "Since the pills are finished, we should look for a way out. Let's look toward the base of the mountain. Perhaps we'll find something there," Old Man Fu proposed. Once spoken, the entire cave faintly shook, followed by the sounds of a muffled rumbling. It sounded out from all around them and without end. The 3 looked at each other with dismay. Bai Yai bit her lip and spoke with an astonished tone. There are others on this mountain. Maybe, but it might be the doing of the silver-winged night fiend as well. The old man shook his head, and a trace of resentment appeared. He had been reminded of his junior martial sister's death. After a moment of silence, Han Li indifferently said, "Regardless, let's be careful on the way out. With our combined might, we shouldn't have anything to fear." Then with a wave of his sleeve, azure mist spread out. The radiant haze swept across the cave, dissolving all the restrictions and sweeping them up in one swoop. In the blink of an eye, the flags and plates returned to Han Li's sleeve and disappeared. "Let's go, we'll speak further after we leave." With light shining all around his body, he flew towards the exit in an azure streak. Old Man Fu and Bai Yai exchanged a glance before hurriedly following after, not daring to delay in the slightest. When Old Man Fu and Bai Yai flew out from the long passageway, Han Li was already floating high in the air and was looking at the top of the valley wall, the source of the noise. Just then, the two discovered that the rumbling sounds were growing weaker. If it weren't for their high cultivation, they hardly would have heard it. Soon, Old Man Fu frowned. The sound seemed to be coming from over there, and its source is growing further away. If it weren't for the restrictions sealing the space around here, the echoes wouldn't be loud enough to hear. Han Li turned to the two and proposed, "In that case, how about we go and take a look since we aren't familiar with the area? It will be better than running into something unprepared. Of course, we'd best conceal ourselves, rather than letting someone else discover us first." Naturally, they both raised no objections. The old man formed an incantation gesture, and his body shined with green light. Afterwards, it turned dim as he gradually faded into a faint green shadow. Bai Yai raised her hand, and a cold light shined from her finger, summoning a sparkling crystalline medallion. With it in hand, she began to utter a spell, and the medallion soon released a silver mist that gradually covered her before disappearing in a flash. Because the restrictions on the mountain greatly reduced their use of spiritual sense, stealth was their ideal choice. But using concealment techniques outside of these circumstances would prove far less effective against cultivators of similar grade. Having seen the two conceal themselves, Han Li smiled and followed suit. Without performing any visible actions, his body pulsed with light before completely erasing his aura. The two stood in front of Han Li but weren't able to detect him in the slightest, much to their alarm. He then slapped a concealment talisman on his body with indifference, turning it completely translucent. "Let's go." Han Li let out a soft command and the three took to the air. In this mysterious foreign land, the three didn't fly quickly in their search for the source of the rumbling, only at a speed similar to body lightning techniques. The three traveled together past the verdant landscape filled with that dense spiritual qi. Each place they crossed seemed to be an ideal place for cultivation. If this mountain were to be exposed to the outside, countless clans would scramble to seize it. An hour later, though they hadn't encountered anything, none of them wore joy on their faces. The journey had been completely lifeless. They hadn't encountered any signs of life, which was only further cause for stifling trepidation. Bai Yai hesitantly said, "Brother Han, do you feel it? The spiritual qi here is amazing, but we've yet to see any spiritual plants. It's all ordinary vegetation." Han Li calmly replied, "I've also noticed it. As we head deeper, the spiritual qi becomes even more abundant. It is the same as the spiritual mountains on the outside. I figured the original cultivators of this mountain grew their plants higher up to take advantage of that. The spiritual qi can become even denser." Bai Yai spoke with amazement. She already considered the current spiritual qi in the air to be ideal for cultivation. When Old Man Fu heard him, his heart stirred. "Brother Han, if the peak of the mountain is truly a holy ground for cultivation, we might not have to be in such a hurry to leave. Wouldn't it be better to cultivate there for a time?" Han Li wryly chuckled. "Brother Fu can't consider this place to be an ordinary spiritual mountain. Why else would the ancient cultivators abandon this place if they could safely cultivate in such abundant spiritual qi? The restriction covering this entire mountain is also very odd. If I figure a way out, I won't be staying." Old Man Fu's expression wavered for a moment before settling with a wry smile. "Brother Han's words are quite reasonable. This truly is an improper place to cultivate. My excitement had clouded my judgment." With a regretful tone, Bai Yai said, "I don't blame you, Brother Fu. I also possessed similar thoughts. After all, cultivating here could save us quite a bit of time." Han Li smiled and thought to say something else when his expression suddenly dropped, and he came to a sudden halt. His eyes flashed with blue light as he turned to the side. The other two were baffled by this sudden change of action and followed his gaze. At a distance far away, there was a white mist coiling in the air. Since fog often formed throughout the mountain, the three hadn't felt that it was strange. Han Li blinked and said, "Let's take a look. There could be something that we could use." Then he changed directions towards distant object. The other two felt baffled, but they knew that he wouldn't act without reason and followed after him. When they entered the fog, they came to a sudden stop. Within the white mist, there was a wide expanse of white stone steps stretched out to the top and bottom of the mountain without end. And at the side of these steps, there was a white stele 30 meters tall and 10 meters wide. Han Li stood in front of it with his hands behind his back as he examined it. The old man dropped down onto the ground and curiously asked, "Has Brother Han discovered something?" With a grave expression, he sullenly replied, "Well, I finally know where this place is. Fellow Taoists, take a look." Yes, with roused spirits, the two took several steps forward. Due to the two ancient golden characters elegantly inscribed at the very top, the conclusion was obvious. Kunwu, could this be the legendary Kunwu Mountain? Old Man Fu shouted out with alarm. As for Bai Yei, she covered her mouth as she gasped with surprise. That's right. During ancient times, Kunwu Mountain was known as the Immortal Mountain, a holy land where ancient cultivators gathered together. The mountain's size and spiritual qi are deserving of its reputation. However, legends had it that those same cultivators had brought the mountain to the spirit world or sank it to the underworld. How could it be here? Bai Yei stared at the stone stele with complete disbelief. Fellow Taoist Bai, legend and history are often far different. It seems the truth was that the mountain was sealed for some unknown reason. By a stroke of fate, we activated an ancient teleportation formation and arrived here. With recovered vigor, Old Man Fu spiritedly said, "Given the mountain's reputation, there are certain to be countless ancient cultivator dwellings here. If we look through a few of them, the rewards will surely be great." Han Li shook his head and took a step forward before lightly stroking the stele. "Perhaps, but since the mountain was sealed, they should have been prepared to leave. I don't believe there will be much to find. On that thought, this stele must be a grand treasure. After countless years, it stayed erect and absorbed unfathomable amounts of spiritual qi, despite being crudely refined." "What, is the stele a treasure?" The other two were startled and began to silently re-examine it. At a glance, it only appeared to be made from common stone. Although it did carry some spiritual qi, it wasn't suitable to create even the lowest grade magic tools. They couldn't help but look at Han Li with an odd expression. He faintly smiled. "It seems you two aren't convinced, but I am completely certain." Although his demeanor was calm, in truth, he was actually greatly puzzled as well. Even he wasn't able to tell what was different about it. The only reason he said this was because the armored earth dragon that was peacefully resting in his spirit beast pouch had violently stirred when he approached it. It cried out without end, indicating that the item was unordinary. Even with his bright-sight spirit eyes, Han Li wasn't able to see anything peculiar and grew quite skeptical. But due to his attitude of letting nothing slip him by, he was forced to speak a few profound words as a pretense. Then, his hand against the stele and covered it in azure radiance. The stone stele trembled, and the light began to quickly shrink. When it shrunk to half its size, Han Li raised his brow and swept his hand, intending on raising the stele and putting it away into his storage pouch. When the stele rose a foot off the ground, it underwent a strange change. It suddenly began to hum and shine, with rays of white light. Meanwhile, Han Li felt it sink as his control had completely disappeared. With a heavy boom, it fell back to its original spot and violently shook the nearby ground. The tremors left ringing in the trio's ears, and the steel surface began to slowly fracture from the bottom up. "This is..." Han Li's expression stirred and he narrowed his eyes. The steel surface." Before Han Li could clearly see what was happening, Old Man Fu suddenly pointed at the back of the cracking stone and shouted out in alarm. Han Li raised his brow. If he remembered correctly, there should have been nothing behind it, but the old man wouldn't act without a reason. He promptly blurred before reappeared behind the stele, only to be stunned by what he saw. From the shattered fragments, there was a bright blue crystal shining from a few deep cracks. "Spirit stones." Han Li blinked, not entirely sure of what he saw. He suddenly flicked his fingers, and over 10 streaks of sword qi weaved together, instantly covering the top half of the stone with azure light. For a time, fragments tore off from the stele and filled their surroundings with a gray mist. From the sharpness of his sword qi, It took only a short moment before the blue light underneath was revealed. Han Li withdrew the azure light with a flick of his finger, revealing a deep blue crystal slab. The crystal was a meter tall and brimming with sparkling blue light. Although it wasn't fully visible, it appeared to be long and flat. The stone steel seemed to only be a thick shell surrounding it. After gazing at it with bright eyes, Bai said with a certain tone, "It isn't an ice attribute spirit stone, nor does it contain any of ice spiritual chi despite its appearance. There is no doubt it isn't a spirit stone. That isn't something that can be refined into other objects, and there is even something inscribed on the surface." Han Li looked at a portion of the bare crystal slab and saw ancient talisman characters roaming across. With a sigh, he condensed the magic power in his body and reached out. Suddenly, a hand of azure light appeared in front of the steel and grabbed the top before raising it out. As he expected, it was extremely heavy, but he was now prepared and forcefully dragged it out from the stone by relying on brute magic power. A blue sparkling crystal appeared before Han Li. Talisman characters roamed across its surface, faintly shining with a dim blue light. When Han Li glanced at the words on its surface, his heart stirred, but he maintained a calm appearance as he grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and pointed at the crystal slab. It began to tremble and massively shrunk to the size of a half-foot-long brick. Then, in a gust of wind, it disappeared into his sleeve. Old Man Fu and Bai Yai were both curious about the crystal, but when they saw that Han Li had no intention of letting them look at it, they tactfully kept quiet. Instead, the two had a quick chat with him before deciding to head further up the mountain. They had already recognized that the faint rumblings were coming from the top and concealed themselves once more as they traveled. Of course, Han Li couldn't have known that the sounds were produced by the Yi clan cultivators. Further up the steps, they were attempting to destroy a restriction the best they could. However, the distance between the two parties was by no means close, and there was also an additional restriction between them. As of current, the eccentric and the Yi clan Grand Elder were standing side by side as they floated above a boulder. Not far beneath them were the others who were standing inside a recently placed spell formation. They were using the power of the formation to control various treasures and attack the huge archway that was blocking their path. The Elder Devil was currently controlling a jet-black flying sword and attacking without emotion. The archway released rays of brilliant light in response and was able to endure the attacks in its entirety. The archway itself seemed to be a strange treasure. With a trace of worry, the large-headed eccentric turned his gaze from the brilliant archway to the white-robed scholar and asked, "Young Third, how long do you suppose until we'll be able to break through the myriad cultivator gate?" The scholar replied with a calm appearance and a sullen tone, "I expect it to be another day. It is quite a bit more troublesome than expected. It is no wonder it possessed such fame in the past. We've been delayed for too long. If we could lend a hand, we'll be able to cut down on time by at least half," the eccentric gloomily muttered, but he didn't show any intention to help. The scholar insipidly replied, "Since there are such vicious ancient beasts like the lion-hawk, we must be on guard. It is better to lose a day than to lack strength when we need it most. Please be patient, seventh uncle. We still have plenty of time." The eccentric sighed, "That is so. Even if the nascent soul cultivators of other sects were quick to act, it would still take time for them to arrive and find the opening. But with this gate taking up so much of our time, I wonder what other restrictions lie ahead of us." "Don't be so worried, seventh uncle. Our Yi clan has naturally considered the matter of breaking the restrictions during the long time we planned this. Our clan has already gathered several secret treasures specialized in destroying them, but it still isn't time to bring them out." "So it was like that. I am relieved." The eccentric's expression relaxed a bit. Then the two calmly observed the destruction of the gate and said nothing else. But not long after, the eccentric stroked his nose and his face sank. He flicked his finger without another word and sent several streaks of yellow sword chi towards a large tree 100 meters away. After it was cut down and swept away, a green-furred silver-winged monster became visible. It only moved by unfolding its wings, easily deflecting the sword chi. Then with a shrieking howl, it coldly examined the Yi clan cultivators below before turning its gaze to the scholar and eccentric. It then flapped its wings and took off. Several blurs later, the monster seemed to merge with the wind and disappeared. Making no attempt to chase it, the eccentric wore a grave expression and said, "Did I see that correctly? It seemed greatly skilled in wind movement techniques and was capable of illusory wind form, much like the legendary Silverwing Night Fiend. If it weren't for the faint corpse chi on its body, I wouldn't have been able to detect it. Corpse chi? I hadn't sensed it, seventh uncle, but your blood chariot arts might have given you the keen senses needed. However, it appears the corpse is quite intelligent. The scholar looked in the direction that the night fiend had disappeared to and wore an unsightly expression. The eccentric shook his head with a frown. Wasn't Kunwu Mountain known to be a land of immortals? How could we encounter vicious creatures such as the lion hawk and heavenly corpses? It is fortunate that we are together, else it would be far more dangerous. After some silence, the scholar slowly said, "It was a land of immortals in the past. Now, it is a sealed relic. It isn't surprising that these strange events have happened, but the only things that should concern us are the divine spirit treasures. These other matters are of little importance." A cold glint shined from the eccentric's eyes. "That is true, but that silver-winged night fiend seems to possess not only great cultivation but even worse, great intelligence. We must be particularly wary of that monster, or it will come to harm us greatly." "Many thanks for your warning, seventh uncle. I will take note of it." The scholar nodded and his tone grew solemn. Light flashed from one of the walls of the stone pavilion where they had taken a rest moments ago. A head full of white hair peeked in and took a look around in a comical manner. When this person discovered that nobody was present, he left the pavilion and slowly lifted himself onto the roof on a large disk of light. The person then raised his head to reveal a wrinkly face and narrow sly eyes. This person was the small mysterious old man, Xianxia. It really is Kunwu Mountain. The spiritual chi is here quite unordinary, but who is so meddlesome to dare open the seal? If those things were to emerge, the entirety of the great Jin will be doomed. I'm quite out of luck to be nearby, as feigning ignorance wasn't much of an option. As he looked around, he suddenly heard the sounds of explosions in the distance and began to wildly stomp on the floor and loudly curse, his face filled with anger. After he was done, he suddenly heard a beautiful soft voice. "Since you knew it was dangerous and still entered, I have to admire you for your courage." When Xianxia heard this voice, he felt his entire body grow cold, as if his very blood had froze. The old man let out a stammer, "Senior, you've come." "How so? I've been here for countless millennium after all. In the past, the three elders here used the strength of over 10,000 men to lay down the final layer of restrictions. It isn't something I would be able to tear alone, or I would have left long ago." The woman's voice was incredibly sweet, quite a contrast to his voice that had instantly turned feeble. Xianxia was first introduced at Yellow Maple Valley in the trial of blood and fire. He later made a reappearance at the Heavenly Talisman Sect when Han Li had visited, only for him to make his way to a Nanjiang sect in recent months. Though initially panicked, Xianxia immediately remembered something and regained his calm. Impossible. With the suppression of the two divine spirit treasures, nobody could break free from the Nine Truths Devil Suppression Formation. If Senior had escaped, you would have already left the mountain through the opening in the seal. You must have had forcibly freed a thread of your spiritual sense to scare me away. You know of the Nine Truths Devil Suppression Formation and the Divine Spirit Treasures. Could it be you are a descendant of the three masters of Kunwu Mountain?" Although the woman's voice was still pleasant to the ear, it now held a cold tone. "In truth, I am not, but there are a few people in this world that also know of this matter. I just happen to be one of them." As Xianxia spoke, he scrutinized his surroundings with great care. The woman's voice snorted, "You won't find anything. My true body has still yet to be freed, and I won't let you ruin my chances. How about you obediently stay here for a few months?" With that said, the air above the stone pavilion began to warp, and a white vortex appeared, covering the small old man in rainbow light. Phantasmic air. Xianxia's expression greatly changed, and silver light shined from his body as he flew out in a streak. However, the rainbow vortex revolved around him, and a huge attractive force firmly held him in place. Soon it swept him away, and he had completely disappeared, as if he was never there to begin with. "It seems I'll have to sleep for a moment more. I hope those cultivators will hurry so I can be truly free when I awaken. Those three masters of Kunwu will know the cost of sealing me, when the day comes. He he." The woman muttered with a weak voice before letting out a wild fit of sweet laughter. 7 days later, the Yi clan cultivators managed to break through the myriad cultivator gate, but they fell into a profound illusion formation. As for Han Li's party, they were blocked by some strange restriction and were forced to deliberate on a method to destroy it. The outside of the seal, however, was brimming with activity. Round 1,000 cultivators had gathered, covering an area of tens of kilometers. There were even a dozen nascent soul eccentrics present. The most eye-catching of them all were the 4 sacred poison sect elders. All of the other nascent soul cultivators were lone actors, having been drawn here by rumors. A blue-robed disciple with a red head scarf was making a report to the elders of the sacred poison sect. The disciple respectfully said, "Grand Elder, we've already examined most of the seal and have a general understanding of it. In an area a dozen kilometers underground, we have detected something hidden beneath an illusion formation. Our disciples skilled in these matters are attempting to dispel it with due haste. Although it was a rapidly placed formation, the creator was extremely skilled, so it will take some time." The middle-aged man with green marks on his face let out a long sigh. "At least it is good that we have an outline of the situation. Since we've already been here for a few days, it would have been troublesome if we couldn't find the opening. However, you have best be on guard. Don't let others discover your actions. Head back and return to us when the formation is dissolved." "Yes, Grand Elder," the disciple shouted with a bow. Then he took out an earth movement talisman and sank into the ground. One of the other sacred poison sect elders said, "Senior Marshal Brother Hua, there are no late nascent soul cultivators in Nanjiang. Even if the other sects were to rush here, we have nothing to fear from them." Grand Elder Hua gloomily replied, "That may be currently true, but every day we wait, the more high-grade cultivators arrive. There are many sects here that rival our power, and if they all hurry to arrive, there will certainly be trouble. Besides, the 10 great sects of the righteous and devilish Tao will involve themselves in time." When the other elders heard this, they either appeared worried or believed the problem to be overstated. However, Elder Hua let out a yelp as he turned his attention to the sky. The others soon mimicked him. A gray cloud loomed over the horizon and was heading in their direction with frightening speed. When the 4 elders of the sacred poison sect sensed that fearsome spiritual pressure, their faces all dropped. In the blink of an eye, it arrived over the small lake before disappearing in a violent rupture. From the ashes, 5 white silhouettes appeared, each of them unmoving and indistinct. The unbreakable Sink Devils. Elder Hua's expression froze. The incarnations of the yin-sifting sect's old devil Qian. One of the other sect elders shouted out with a pale complexion. Elder Hua let out a snort and softly said, "Apart from that old devil, who else cultivates such a devilish art? His true body can possess any of the 5 incarnations. Apart from killing all 5, he is practically immortal." I was wondering who had such understanding of my techniques, so it was the sacred poison sect's fellow Taoist Hua. "I didn't expect that your sect would act with such vigor in coming here. Could it be that you know something about what is sealed?" A mysterious voice slowly sounded out from the sky. It was erratic, as if each word came from different locations. Cultivator Hua deeply sighed and forced a laugh. "Brother Qian must be joking. How could we know of such a thing? It is only that our sect was closer, so I went ahead to take a look. Nevertheless, may I ask why the esteemed Grand Elder of the Yin-sifting sect is here?" Grand Elder Qian let out a mysterious laugh and said, "Oh, I recall that the closest sect to the location was the Immortal Form sect. Did yours move? As for me, I was in Nanjiang on business and only happened to come across all of this." Elder Hua dryly laughed and asked, "It can't be easy for someone as famous as Brother Qian to leave his sect. May I ask what stirred you into personally taking action?" "Just dealing with a few traitors that had fled here, nothing important. I was simply handling the matter quietly." "Is that so? It seems I was being too suspicious." After that, the two spoke no further. For a time, the air became stagnant. "I found it. There is an opening to the north. We can enter through there. The sacred poison sect is breaking the entrance as we speak." A figure emerged from the side of the lake and shouted as it flew into the distance. The voice startled all of the nearby cultivators. Almost immediately, several blue-robed disciples were chasing after the cultivator with alarmed fury. However, he used an exceptional movement technique and was able to escape at great speed. The sacred poison sect elders' expressions all became wretched. Old Devil Qian bellowed with laughter. "So it was like that. I do hold some understanding of spell formations and can provide you with some assistance. I'll be heading down first." Soon after, his Sink Devils flew downward below the lake and disappeared without a trace. "Let's go. Old Devil Qian is ruthless. We can't allow him to harm our disciples." With an ashen complexion, Cultivator Hua flipped his hand and summoned a small yellow flag. With a tremble of his wrist, a yellow cloud covered the nearby sacred poison sect members and brought them all underground in an instant. Others in the area also began to move and burrow underground as well. In the blink of an eye, nearly half of them all followed. As for those who remained, they were low-grade disciples that neither possessed earth movement techniques or earth movement treasures. Over 10 kilometers north and 3 kilometers deep, there was a huge pitch-black area with balls of brilliant light flashing about. Below them was a barrier of unfathomably thick white light. Not only that, but layers of astonishing lightning surrounded it. If anybody were to approach, they would be immediately struck down without the slightest warning. Those that were lucky could dodge it, but otherwise, they would have their protections flicker out of control, forcing them to stay away for a time. But what these cultivators were paying attention to was an area in the barrier where lightning wasn't present, guarded by 8 sacred poison disciples. They all wore solemn expressions and were standing in confrontation against the others, preventing them from approaching. Those that were blocked were shouting a torrent of insults, but none dared to take action. After all, the sacred poison sect possessed a grand reputation in Nanjiao. As most of these cultivators were native to the region, they didn't dare to rashly stir up trouble. Of course, there were also those that had no fear of their reputation, and such an example had appeared in a streak of crimson. "Get lost, I am going to enter." The person who said this was an old man who spoke with an arrogant tone. When they saw that a nascent soul cultivator had appeared, one of the disciples helplessly said, "Senior, our sect found this first. Our martial uncles are nearby, Senior should." The old man coldly laughed and said, "Even if Hua Tianqi was here, I would still enter." He then raised his hand, and a blinding red light lit up from his palm.